I used to live in a quiet, suburban neighborhood in the outskirts of Colorado. The kind of place where everyone waves at each other but minds their own business. Most houses look the same: beige paint, trimmed lawns, and mailboxes that lean slightly forward after years of sun and wind. My next-door neighbor was a man named Paul Henderson. He was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, quiet but friendly in that reserved, old-fashioned way. He'd moved in about a year after I did. We'd exchange nods, sometimes small talk about the weather or lawn care, but never more than that. Around late autumn, something about Paul started to change. At first, it was small things. His lights would stay on until 3 or 4 a.m. almost every night. I could see his living room window glowing from my bedroom. Then there was the sound, like scraping noises, like furniture being dragged across the floor. It wasn't every night, but it happened often enough to notice. I told myself maybe he was remodeling or moving stuff around. But then I stopped seeing him altogether. For about 2 weeks, there was no sign of Paul. His car never moved, his trash cans were full, and his mailbox started to overflow with letters and flyers. At first, I thought he was away, maybe on a trip. But one night, I noticed something strange. It was around 1 a.m., and I was standing by my kitchen sink when I saw a figure inside his house. The curtains were open just a bit, and in that sliver of light, I saw someone standing completely still in the living room, facing the window. The silhouette looked like Paul's, but there was something off about the posture, stiff, motionless. I watched for about 30 seconds, and then the light turned off. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I went over and knocked on his door. No answer. I tried again later that day. Nothing. Finally, I decided to call the local police for a welfare check. 2 officers came by around 5 p.m. They knocked, called his name, then eventually forced the door open when no one answered. I stood outside, nervous, half expecting to hear something terrible. But when they came back out, their faces looked more confused than alarmed. One of them said, "No one's inside, but everything looks normal." When I asked what they meant, he said the house looked lived in. There were fresh dishes in the sink, a TV remote on the couch, even a cup of coffee half finished on the counter. But no sign of Paul. No luggage missing, no clothes packed, no forced entry. They filed a missing person report, but there wasn't much else to do. A few days later, I started noticing something even stranger. Every night, at exactly 12:47 a.m., the light in Paul's living room would flicker on for a few seconds, then turn off again. Always the same time. It freaked me out enough that I recorded it on my phone. When I played the video back, I noticed something I didn't see before. In the brief moment the light flickered, there was a reflection in the window, like someone was standing inside, holding the light switch. I sent the video to the police, but they said it was probably a glitch in the wiring or motion sensor. But I knew what I saw. A week later, I decided to look for myself. It was just after midnight when I went over, flashlight in hand. The police had locked the house, but I knew one of the side windows didn't close properly. Paul had complained about it once. I slid it open, climbed inside, and called out his name. The air was cold, colder than outside. The place smelled like dust and old coffee. Everything was exactly how the cops described. Coffee cup, remote, mail on the table. But there was one thing they didn't mention. On the kitchen counter was a small black recorder, one of those old handheld voice recorders.
I pressed play. There was a few seconds of static, then Paul's voice. "If anyone finds this, I don't know what's happening. I keep hearing someone walking around the house at night, but when I check, there's no one here. Last night I saw myself standing in the hallway, just standing there, looking at me." His breathing was heavy, then a long silence. "It's 12:47 now. I hear the footsteps again." Then static. The recorder clicked off. I froze. The same time, 12:47. That was the time the light flickered every night. Before I could think, I heard it, a single slow creak from upstairs. I turned off my flashlight and listened. Another creak, then silence. I wanted to run, but something in me needed to know. I climbed the stairs, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own steps. The hallway was pitch black, except for faint moonlight leaking through the window. The last door on the right, his bedroom, was slightly open. I nudged it with my foot, shining my light inside. Empty. But the mirror on the wall caught my attention. There was something strange about it, like fog, even though the room was freezing. I stepped closer, and my reflection seemed delayed, like it was a split second behind my movements. Then my reflection blinked, but I didn't. I stumbled backward, dropped my flashlight, and ran out the way I came. I called the police again, but when they searched, they found nothing unusual. The recorder was gone. The light never flickered again after that night. 2 months later, a new family moved in. I never told them anything. Sometimes, when I walk past late at night, I still glance at that window. And once, only once, I thought I saw a man standing there again, perfectly still, facing my direction.
This story was sent to me by a man named Ethan, a 32-year-old mechanic from Boise, Idaho. He swears everything you're about to hear actually happened, and to this day, no one can explain it. Ethan worked at a small auto repair shop on the edge of town. His shift ended every night at 9 p.m. sharp. The drive home usually took no more than 20 minutes, a straight road through a quiet stretch of forest. He'd been taking that route for nearly 5 years, so it was second nature to him. But one Wednesday night in November, something went wrong. That day was normal. He finished 2 brake jobs, replaced a fuel pump, and closed up the shop around 9:10. He texted his wife, "Leaving now." She replied with a thumbs up. But he didn't make it home. According to his wife, he didn't walk through the door until 5:37 a.m., almost 9 hours later. When he came in, he looked pale, dazed, like he'd just woken from a bad dream. She asked where he'd been. Ethan said, "What do you mean? I just drove home." He looked at his phone and saw the time. His face went blank. That's when panic hit. He pulled up Google Maps on his phone to check his route history, something he said he'd never even thought of doing before. According to the timeline, his car had completely vanished from tracking between 9:21 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. No GPS data, no movement, just a dead gap. He checked his dash cam. It had power, but the SD card was corrupted. Nothing after 9:19 p.m. could be played. He tried to remember the drive, but his memory cut out at the same time. The last thing he recalled was stopping at a red light near the old Pine Ridge gas station, then nothing. The next morning, he went to his car looking for clues. The outside was clean, but there was something strange on the roof. a thin layer of dirt or dust that looked grayish-white, like ash. But here's the thing. It hadn't rained, and there were no nearby factories or fires that week. When he ran his hand across it, it felt gritty, almost like powdered cement. Inside, the car smelled faintly metallic, like blood and ozone. He brought it to work later that day, and one of his coworkers noticed fine scratch marks on the roof, long, uneven, running parallel, like something had been dragged across it. Ethan didn't mention it to the police at first. He didn't want to sound insane. But his wife insisted something was wrong, so they filed a missing person report retroactively, even though he'd returned. The local sheriff interviewed him twice. Both times his story was consistent. They searched the forested road for signs of an accident, but found nothing. Then a week later, things got stranger. While sorting through his laundry, his wife noticed Ethan's shirt from that night had a small tear on the back, right between the shoulder blades. Around the tear was a dark brown stain. She thought it was dried mud, but when she sniffed it, it smelled like iron. Blood. They sent it for testing at a local lab through a friend who worked in forensics. The results came back 2 days later. It was human blood, but it wasn't Ethan's. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became increasingly paranoid. He'd wake up at exactly 3:11 a.m. every night, drenched in sweat, certain someone had just called his name. His wife said sometimes he'd sit up, staring at the wall, whispering, "They're still out there." He started keeping his phone's camera on whenever he drove. He'd place it on the dash, recording both the road and his face. Most nights the footage was completely normal, until December 9th. That night, his phone battery drained twice as fast as usual. When he got home, he reviewed the footage, and in the last few seconds, just before pulling into his driveway, something flickered in the reflection of his windshield. A shape, humanoid, tall, standing in the middle of the road behind him. No face, just a dark silhouette that vanished as the headlights shifted. Ethan stopped driving alone after that. One afternoon in January, his wife found him sitting in the car, engine off, staring blankly at the steering wheel. The radio was on, but the volume was turned all the way down. He didn't even notice her approach. When she opened the door, he turned to her slowly and whispered, "I went back." He'd driven that same route again, hoping to trigger his memory. He said around the same gas station where he last remembered being conscious, his car radio cut out and all the lights flickered. Then through the trees, he saw a faint glow, like headlights deep in the forest, too high off the ground to belong to any car. He swore he heard a low humming sound, rhythmic and mechanical, pulsing through the steering wheel. Then his vision blurred, and for a few seconds, everything went silent. When it came back, he was parked in front of his own house again, engine off, seatbelt unbuckled, door all the way open. That drive lasted less than 25 minutes. But his phone, again, showed a 4-hour gap in GPS tracking. He deleted the video that night. When his wife asked why, he said, "It wasn't me driving." A few months later, they moved out of Boise. Ethan changed jobs and refused to drive anywhere alone after dark. The car eventually broke down. When he sold it to a salvage yard, the new owner found something strange lodged behind the rear bumper. A small fragment of metal, thin and smooth like glass, but cold to the touch. When tested, it didn't match any known material from the vehicle. The lab report came back with a single note at the bottom. Composition, unknown. Ethan said that was the last piece of evidence he ever wanted to see. To this day, he can't remember where he was for those 9 hours. All he knows is, every time he passes a mirror, there's a faint humming sound in his ears, the same one he heard on that road. And sometimes, when he's driving, he swears he can see another version of himself sitting perfectly still in the reflection, hands on the wheel, eyes wide open.
I used to rent an apartment in an old brick building in downtown Minneapolis. It wasn't fancy. Creaky floors, thin walls, flickering hallway lights, but the rent was cheap and the neighborhood was quiet. The building had 4 floors, maybe a dozen tenants total. My unit, 3B, sat right across from 4C, which, according to the landlord, had been vacant for years. He told me the tenant before me, an older man named Harold Lang, had passed away in that apartment. Natural causes, he said, waving it off like it was nothing. No one's lived there since. At first, I didn't think much about it, until one night, about 3 weeks after moving in. It was around 2:30 a.m. I'd just come back from a late shift and was microwaving leftovers when I heard something faint through the wall. Voices. At first, I thought it was the TV from another unit, a man and a woman talking, muffled but distinct. I paused the microwave and pressed my ear against the wall. The voices were coming from 4C. I could make out fragments like, "Did you lock it? He's still here. Don't let him see." Then silence. I waited, frozen, listening for another sound. Nothing. The next morning, I asked my neighbor across the hall, "Hey, do you know if anyone moved in to 4C?" She frowned. "No, it's been empty since I got here. Why?" I just said, "Never mind." Over the next few nights, the voices returned, always around 2 or 3 a.m., always faint, sometimes just whispers. It got to the point where I started recording them on my phone. The first few nights, the playback was empty, just static and low hums from the fridge. But on the 4th night, I caught something. You can hear a man's voice saying, "It's not supposed to be open," followed by a soft thud like a door closing, and then faint laughter. When I replayed it, I noticed something odd. The timestamp on the recording said 1:47 a.m., but I was certain I started recording at 2:15. I tried again the next night, watching the clock this time. I started recording exactly at 2 o'clock. When I checked the file later, the timestamp once again showed 1:47. Always 1:47. By this point, I was losing sleep. I emailed the landlord and asked if I could check 4C just to ease my mind. He sighed and said, "Sure, but don't blame me if it smells like dust." He came up the next morning with a jangling set of keys. It took him 3 tries to find the right one. When the door opened, a stale, dry air poured out, the kind that clings to your throat. The room was completely empty. No furniture, no curtains, just bare walls and dust-covered floors. But what caught my attention were footprints, faint outlines in the dust leading from the living room to the bedroom. They were small, like a woman's, and recent. The landlord saw them too. He muttered, "Huh," then brushed it off. "Probably me last time I came up here." Except there were no overlapping prints. Just one clear path. I wanted to check the bedroom. The door was half open. I pushed it, and it creaked like something hadn't moved in years. Inside, the air was heavier. The wallpaper was peeling, and there was a dark ring on the ceiling, like water damage. Then, on the far wall, I noticed scratch marks. 3 vertical lines, almost perfectly parallel, gouged deep into the plaster. They looked old but deliberate, too high for a child, too clean for an accident. The landlord said, "Okay, you've seen it. Happy now?" and locked the door behind us. But that night, the voices came back, louder. Around 2:18 a.m., I woke to the sound of crying, a woman, muffled and distant. Then a man's voice. "He knows we're here." The crying stopped. The temperature in my apartment dropped fast, like someone opened a freezer. My breath fogged. I sat up, staring at the wall between me and 4C. Then, clear as day, I heard knocking, 3 slow knocks, coming from the other side of that wall. I didn't move. After a minute,
I worked up the nerve to knock back once. The instant I did, everything went silent. Then, from behind the wall, a voice whispered. Not like a human whisper, but low and distorted, almost mechanical. "It's not supposed to be open." I froze. The air felt charged, like static. My lights flickered once and went out completely. The rest of that night, I sat awake with my phone flashlight on, waiting for morning. The next day, I took off work and went back to the landlord. I told him exactly what I heard. He stared at me for a moment, then said quietly, "You heard them too." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old envelope. Inside were 3 complaints, all from past tenants who'd lived in 3B. Each one described the same thing: voices from 4C, whispers at night, cold air, and knocks on the wall. The last letter was dated 2014. It was from a woman named Sarah Lang, Harold's wife. The letter simply read, "Harold keeps talking to them. He says they're in the walls. I don't think he's sleeping anymore." I asked the landlord what happened to her. He said she went missing the night before Harold died. Police never found her. That night, I packed my things, but before I left, I did one last stupid thing. I placed my phone against the wall, recording, and whispered, "Who's there?" For a few seconds, nothing. Then faint breathing. Then a voice, so soft it barely registered. "4C is open again." The file ended with a loud static burst that almost blew my speakers. The next morning, I drove to my sister's place across town. I never went back for the rest of my stuff. 2 months later, the building burned down in what firefighters called an electrical fault. But the fire chief said something odd in an interview, that the fire originated in a sealed unit that had no signs of power running through it. Apartment 4C. And according to records, it had been permanently disconnected from electricity since 2015.